Hi, everyone. Great to be speaking to you today about a topic that I think doesn't get spoken about anywhere near enough when it comes to looking for work. And that is our salary and how we go about negotiating a salary during the recruitment process. And joining me today to do so is salary negotiation expert and author of Fearless Salary Negotiation, Josh Doody. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us today, Josh, because as I said, I don't think people talk about this anywhere near enough. We talk about how to prepare for an interview, we talk about how to prepare for a resume, but we just don't talk enough about how do we go about negotiating salary when we are offered one. So, to kick things off with, tell us a bit about your journey to becoming a salary negotiation expert and published author.
Well, it started as sort of a traditional career. I studied computer and electrical engineering at the University of Florida here in Florida in the U.S. And from there, I just kind of took a regular electrical engineering job and had a good time with that, but started to get pretty bored pretty quickly. And eventually, I realized that I wanted to study or be more involved with something that looked more like the business side of things, the customer facing side of things. And so I changed jobs to a very small software company and began doing business analysis and project management type work. And that company happened to be a software company that sold HR software that was used for doing performance reviews, goal setting, and things like that, among other things, salary compensation planning, I guess I should say, using our software to help companies plan their compensation. And so that was the first time I got kind of a view behind the curtain about how companies pay people. And so from there, I made some pretty typical career moves and learned more about that business and how things worked. And eventually negotiated my own salary for the first time and found that I got a pretty good result, which was surprising and nice. And then as people would ask me kind of what I had done, what my experience was like, I realized that I might have more to share and decided to write a book about that process that I used and how to negotiate job offers and earn more money throughout your career. And that led me to write Fearless Salary Negotiation and then to eventually begin coaching people through that process that I had created.
Mm, fantastic. It's wonderful to hear about people whose careers start out in one role and then their profession is sometimes completely something different, but it's often a very entertaining path to get there. So, just to start off with, why do we feel uncomfortable, talking about salary and negotiating offers? Like, I do a lot of recruitment for sales roles, and normally sales candidates, they're very confident, they're well presented, they promote themselves, but even when it comes to them talking about their own salary, they feel really nervous and uncomfortable. Why is that so?
I don't think there's a really good answer to this other than it's sort of just become almost a cultural taboo. For whatever reason, people have just become uncomfortable with it. And I think because it's better for companies if employees don't talk about their salaries, intra or inter company, they have kind of reinforced that taboo. And so, in general, I think that it's just sort of a cultural thing that has caught on in most cultures that people are uncomfortable talking about those numbers and they avoid talking about those numbers. I think some people feel it's a little gauche to talk about what they make. But I think that ultimately it's just kind of been a reinforced idea from the company side where they said, well, it's probably better if people don't talk about salary. So we're
Mm,
not going to encourage them to do that. And people are uncomfortable talking about very personal things like that. And so they kind of avoid it.
yeah. So the question that normally kicks all this off during the recruitment process, Josh, and sometimes it can happen very early on, sometimes it's not until the end, but when the interviewer or the recruiter asks the candidate, what are your salary expectations? How should we answer that question?
There are different opinions on this, and I have a pretty strong opinion. It's something that I'm pretty dogmatic about, and that is that I don't think that candidates should share salary expectations with potential employers. I think that it works against them, and so instead, I think that what the candidate should do is sort of sidestep that question,
Mhm.
with the goal being to defer that conversation until later, to let the company mention the first numbers and to defer that salary and numbers conversation to a later point in the interview or recruitment process which I think gives them a better opportunity to negotiate. It helps them to avoid making mistakes in terms of guessing what the compensation might be that the company would be willing to pay. And it gives them a chance to continue to impress the people who are interviewing them so that they can hopefully command a higher salary as the company begins to realize how good a fit this person is and starts to try to craft an offer that is designed to persuade them to join the team. And so
Mm,
rather than sharing numbers, I think the best thing that the candidate can do is say something like, I don't really have a number in mind. Um, I'm excited about this role. I think I'll be a valuable addition to this team. I want this move to be a big move forward for me in terms of both responsibility and compensation. And I look forward to hearing what you think when we get to that stage.
mm. I think it's a great answer too, Josh, because from a recruiter's point of view, um, we would respect that, almost that level of confidence as well from a candidate that says, I'm not ready to go there yet. It makes the candidate sound organized in their job search. And therefore I think it makes the recruiter think, oh, okay, this candidate's, thought about this. And even though they're not telling me, it sounds like they're prepared, which I think really helps candidates when it comes to those negotiations. But how do we actually know what number? So if you're unsure at the moment, look, I'm going for a job. I'm not really sure what my worth is. I'm not really sure what the role's going to pay. How do we actually work this out?
Yeah, so this is a little bit sneaky because we're on one hand not sharing numbers, and on the other hand trying to come up with numbers to use as a guide.
Yeah.
So I use a process that I call market value estimation
Mhm.
that I think of as sort of a series of concentric circles that start really wide and move down to kind of a narrow, almost like a target or a bullseye. And so the first widest circle is industry pay for this type of role. And so this is where you can use websites that have salary details and information, really broad ones like Glassdoor or PayScale, all the way down to really narrow ones in my field like levels.fyi, that give you a sense of, in the industry for this kind of job, what is the average pay? What do some salaries look like and comp packages look like? And that will at least give you a general idea of what the ballpark looks like for what you should be making. And then from there, I think it's a process of trying to narrow down or hone that estimate the best that you can with more sort of close information to you, more specific information to your situation. So rather than industry wide, you might look at the industry in your geographic region, or you might look at type of company that you want to work for within the industry if there's a subset. And so you continue to look at what salaries might be on those websites, or by talking to people that
Mm,
you meet at conferences or colleagues who have gone to work for other companies, figuring out what they're paying people. And then, of course, the ultimate data that you could use if you can get a hold of it is, what do engineers or project managers or business analysts or whatever accountants make at the company that you want to go to in the kind of experience role that you're looking at. And so hopefully you can narrow down from, what's the industry pay for this role all the way down to a specific, what does a person with my type of resume, my years of experience make at this particular company that I'm considering for doing this job. And then
mm,
some from all those data points, you should be able to kind of aggregate an estimate. It's an estimate, it's a guess,
yeah,
but it's a guess as to what you might be paid if you go work for that company.
yeah. And the great thing, I think, Josh, is pretty much 99% of what you've mentioned there. You can just do it online at home in front of your laptop. And it's just like doing a little bit of research. But for me, I simply point candidates a lot of the time to the job boards. Go and have a look at what similar roles are advertising and what that salary is paying. And you can probably find some that are paying a little bit more than what you are on. And you can also find ones that are paying a little bit less. So it's about choosing the right ones for you. But let's say we've done that. We've done our research. We've got to the end of the third interview. We've been offered the role. What are our next steps? How do we now go about actually negotiating and hopefully getting a better offer?
Yeah, so now we're right into my wheelhouse. This is what I do, every day for a living. So the first thing is just a little word of encouragement, which is that you should negotiate your offer. There are situations where maybe the offer looks a lot better than you expected it to. And that can be almost a discouragement to negotiate because you say, oh, wow, this is a really good offer. I don't want to rock the boat here. But usually what that tells me is that the candidate has underestimated their value in this role to this company. And so that's actually, an even greener light to negotiate, if I can use that analogy. So once you've begun negotiating, hopefully you have some idea what you are hoping for. I call it your minimum acceptable salary or your walkaway number, but it's some line that you say, if they're not going to pay me at least this amount, then I can't go do that job. And so it's just an objective way to evaluate the offer. So the first thing you should do is ask for some time to think about the offer and then think about it. Compare it to what your expectation was before you got the offer based on everything you know about the role, the location, your level of experience, the value that you'll bring, and all those things. Then you have
How long
some
should we
sense of
think
where to
about it
start.
for, Josh? What's too long? We don't want to lose the enthusiasm of the employer. Is it 48 hours? Is 5 days too long?
I usually hope to respond to a job offer, which means to counteroffer, within 2 to 3 business days at most after
Mhm.
they make the offer. Yeah,
Yep.
so I would say a couple of days is a very reasonable and good time frame where you can respond pretty quickly without making the company feel like you're holding back on them or dragging your heels,
Yeah.
but give you enough time to strategize and put a plan together.
Great. And what's next?
So once you've got some time to work with, then the next thing to do is to figure out how much to counteroffer, and to put that counteroffer together. So my rule of thumb is that you should counter between 10 and 20% above their offer. I recommend that you prioritize the component or components of the offer that are most important to you, that are most valuable to you. Almost always that's going to be base salary. There are some cases where that's something like equity or maybe sign on bonuses in some weird cases, but usually it's going to be base salary. And so my rule of thumb is to take their offer and add 10 to 20%, and that's your counteroffer. The 10% end is kind of on the low end, and that generally means, maybe they're offering this same role to several candidates at the same time because they're filling, 5 seats.
Yeah.
Or you got the sense that they're not particularly motivated to hire you, but they are willing to make you an offer. For whatever reason, you feel like they're making you an offer, which is great, but they're not extremely motivated to work with you, to negotiate with you, and to be flexible. And so that's the 10% end of the range. On the 20% end is that's kind of the high aggressive counteroffer. And that's a situation where you have a sense that you're a unique candidate to them. They're very motivated to hire you. They're very excited to have you on their team. You're going to add a lot of value in the role. And so that's when you would counter about 20%. So you should be somewhere on that spectrum between 10 and 20%. You'll pick that number based on kind of how close you are to either end of that spectrum. And then you'll put together your counteroffer, which I recommend doing through email. And I know we'll talk about this later, but
Yeah.
the email itself will have some components, which are, kind of some filler, some, hey, how are you doing? Hope you're having a good week. But then you'll have the counteroffer, which is, you offered $100,000 and I'd be more comfortable at $115,000. And then there's also a paragraph in there that I call the why I'm awesome paragraph, which is a summary of the value that you're going to bring to the team, which is making your case for the counteroffer that you're making, giving it some strength, but also creating a sort of document that can be internally shared if they need to get approvals from finance or the comp team or the hiring manager needs to get involved in that sort of
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
So, kind of wrapping all that up, you pick your counteroffer amount between 10 and 20%. You put it into an email, which again, we'll talk about in a minute, that describes why you're worth more than what they offered. And then the idea is that you would then counteroffer and get that over to the recruiter. And that's about 80% of sort of the heavy lifting of a negotiation. That's
Mm,
the hard work.
mm. How do we make sure, Josh, that when we're negotiating, we're still coming across as, I guess, grateful and thankful that we've been offered the job and we don't lose any momentum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of that goes into sort of tone, which I just naturally have a knack for. And I mentioned, I said the word filler with some of the things that are in that email. So that's some of that stuff like, hey, I hope you're having a really great week. I appreciate the offer that you made. It looks really good. I would like to talk about the base salary. Here's
Hmm.
why, I'm an excellent fit for the role. You offered $100,000. I'd be more comfortable if we could settle on something more like $115,000. I look forward to hearing from you soon. And so
Yeah.
all of it is very collaborative. It's you're thinking about collaborating with the recruiter. You're not in a fight with them. You're not at
Yeah.
war with them. I don't use ultimatums or tell my clients to bluff or to threaten to walk away. You're not using aggressive tactics. You're using collaborative tactics to show the
Mm,
recruiter that we're on the same team here. We're both trying to get the same result, which is that I joined your company, And we just need to figure out the financial details before we do. So if you can help me do that, then I would love to be part of
Yeah.
your team.
Bring them along with you. Well, let's get to the email then. Why do you think email is a better way to do it as opposed to, say, a phone call?
I think the simple reason is that you're talking to a recruiter. A big part of a recruiter's job is to negotiate job offers. That's what they
Mhm.
do all day, every day. And of course, the bigger the company, the more candidates they're working with at any given time, the bigger the organization that they're part of in terms of recruiting. And so they're just going to be really good at negotiating. And most of us are not as good as they are. And so I think that a real time telephone or face to face negotiation with a professional salary negotiator is probably not the ideal scenario for us to get the best results and to stick to our plan. And so instead, what I prefer to do is to negotiate through email, which kind of levels the playing field. It takes away some of their advantage as professional negotiators, but it also gives us a chance to sort of back channel communicate to other people who might be involved and might want to be aware that we're negotiating so that they can either offer support for us as a candidate because we interviewed really well or they want us on their team, or because they're just compelled by the case that we put in writing, which will just be easier for us to do eloquently than it would be to explain, on a 2-minute phone call where you're very nervous and trying to
Mm,
make sure you say the right numbers and don't forget anything and that sort of thing.
yeah.
So I think it's really more of just sort of a tactical idea that negotiating in real time on a phone call with a professional negotiator is going to be harder and probably
Yeah.
produce
Sure is.
inferior results to what you
Yeah.
would get through a slow, deliberate negotiation through an email where you can craft the email over a day or two.
Yeah. So using that example you said there, Josh, if you've been offered 100 and you go back and you counter offer with 115, what do we do if the employer just comes back and says, no, it's 100, take it or leave it? What's the strategy from here?
So you have a couple of options there. I think the main thing is to realize that that's actually a pretty unusual result. Most of the
Okay.
time, they'll try to work with you. And so they are sending signals to you there that they're not flexible. And so the question is, do you believe them? Most of the time, when somebody says, no, we're going to stick to our initial offer, we're not negotiating, I tend to believe them. And so then the question is, one, did the offer they made initially meet or exceed that walk away number that I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier? If
Hmm.
it did, then you might consider saying, okay, I understand there's nothing to negotiate. Let's go. Or you might say, well, maybe there's something else I can ask for here. There's something that's important to me. Like, they only offer me 2 weeks of paid vacation time, which is pretty standard here in the US for kind of a newer employee to a company. Maybe you could say, okay, well, I understand you're not flexible on the salary, but could you improve the vacation by a week per year or something like that? Or you might be able to negotiate something else like how often you have to come into the office if it's like a partially remote role, or a reimbursement for some sort of business expense that isn't explicitly called out in the offer they made you. So you have a couple of options there. The first one is just to kind of ask yourself if you believe them. Usually, if they don't move at all, I tend to believe them. And so you can either just accept the offer if it's pretty good and you're okay with it, or you can say, well, what's another avenue that I can take here to try to negotiate something that isn't the salary that I asked for? Can I get more equity? Or maybe you could ask for a sign-on bonus. So in our
Mm.
example, they offered 100,000. We countered at 115. They said we can't move, and you could say, okay, well, I understand that you can't move on the salary. I wonder if you could offer a $10,000 signing bonus, which would help me to close that gap at least for the first year while I transition to this new role, something
Yeah,
like that. So those are the
makes a lot of
basic
sense.
kind of ideas that I take into that part of the conversation if they don't move on the first
Mm,
offer.
mm. Now, Josh, you've created for us a really great salary negotiation guide, which I'm holding up. Everybody watching the video today will be able to download this guide from our website. But before we finish, I want to ask you about salary negotiation for existing employees. So, an employee who's got their company annual review coming up. What do you recommend for them? And are there maybe is there a slightly different process that an existing employee should follow if they're wanting to get an increased salary moving forward?
Totally different process. Much more challenging, believe it or not, to get a raise at a current company because you're kind of already in there. You're already into their system. You're already on a point in the pay scale for that role. So it can be really challenging to make a big jump there. I think the first thing is something that you mentioned, which is, when to do it. You're probably going to have better results if you can find an off cycle opportunity to do it. So if your review is coming up very soon, it might already be too late for you to really affect the amount of a raise you might get because the budgeting might already have been done. Whereas if you have 6 months until that will happen, until that conversation will happen, until you will get a raise, you might be able to actually change the way they budget that. In very broad strokes, the way that I approach this is much different than a salary negotiation for a new job. The way that I think about asking for a raise is that you essentially want to, one, demonstrate your value in quantitative terms if possible. And the idea is that you're asking for a raise because you feel that you should be compensated for the additional value that you're bringing to your role now that you're not compensated for by the salary that was set when you accepted the role or the last time you got a raise. So, in other words, I got a raise or I took this job a year ago. Since then, I've taken on some new responsibilities that were not part of the kind of original deal. Those are valuable. And because those are valuable, I'd like to be compensated for some of that value. And so the idea is that you would figure out what you think your target salary should be. So as opposed to not sharing any numbers, you're actually going to come up with and suggest your own number.
Okay.
I call that target salary. Then
Yeah.
you'll also build a case that says, here are the valuable things that I'm doing that are not currently compensated, and
Mm,
articulate them as clearly as you can, hopefully in quantitative terms. So you can say there's a straight line from the work that I do to additional, revenue in the company or cost savings or time savings, whatever those things are, so that you can say these are the things that justify the higher salary that I'm asking for because I'm not being compensated for those.
mm,
And again, I recommend starting with a verbal conversation. You schedule a time with your manager and say, I'd like to talk about my compensation. It's been
mhm,
a year, 18 months, 2 years since I was given a raise. And since then, I've taken on a lot of new responsibilities and I think they're valuable. And so I would like to discuss a raise to this amount. And here are the reasons for that. I've done this project, it made this much money. I did this project that saved the company this much money and reduced cycle time. And so I'm wondering if you can help me to make that happen. Then
mm,
after that conversation, I recommend following up with an email again. I like emails. This time, it's really more of a document because, again, you're trying to make things easy for your manager. Your manager is a
mm,
very busy person. They have a lot of things on their plate, including hiring other people to work for your team and grow the business and that kind of thing. And so you're saying, here's everything that you need to just rubber stamp an approval for this raise if you can, or to pass it along to finance for approval with your blessing if you can. Or if that's not available, at least we can have a conversation about what the timeline might look like for this, what goals I need to set and achieve in order to earn the raise that I'm asking for. And so it's a much more sort of forward and collaborative conversation where you are offering everything up to your manager to hopefully persuade them that, yes, we should do this. And I will just approve this and I'll send it along.
mm. I think existing employees are even more nervous or more shy of asking for a raise than candidates are, because it's your manager, it's your workplace, it's your surroundings. It's not a comfortable conversation a lot of the time. But I think the process that you've outlined there today, Josh, makes a lot of sense. Particularly the advance notice. I think when a manager knows it's coming as well, it starts, their sort of antennas go up a little bit as well around, okay, they want to talk about salary. What are they on again? Oh, okay, maybe that is a little bit low. And then by the time you actually ask for it, they're expecting it in many ways. It's not coming to them as a shock or a surprise, and which I think works in your advantage. Well, Josh, thank you very much for joining us today. Some of the things you've outlined, some of the strategies there, I think will really help. Will really help any job seeker to better prepare for when they are next offered a salary that they would like to negotiate. Thanks very much for joining us. All the best with the coaching.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, James. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate the conversation. Best of luck to you too.
Goodbye for now.